All right. So you are a part of the Truth Option, which comes from the title of a book written in 1984 I read during my undergrad IUPUI studying psychology. So my name is Greg Pryor. I am the school director at the University Heights Excel Center, along with Dwight and Miriam that are part of this group. So a little bit about me. I have been with Goodwill almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in July. So I was fortunately part of the team that shifted the model to more direct instruction, less online learning. So it's been a journey. I have served at 3 different schools. So I started off at Meadows as a life coach. I transitioned to Michigan Street as a math college career readiness teacher. Then I served as lead coach at Michigan Street for 2 years, and then served as director of Michigan Street for 3 years. And then I've been at University Heights for 2 years as school director. So I've done a little bit of everything here. So it's nice to see you all, and hope you enjoy the session. So the goal of this session is to raise awareness, offer resources, really about how our language and preferences for how life goes impact our mental health. So some of this comes from my experience in psychology, from some personal experiences in therapy, and pulling some techniques from that were super helpful for me, and just trying to, again, raise awareness, but give folks some tips. Okay? So this is my lovely family. So this is my wife, Alyssa, and our 2 kids, Vince, who is 5, and Scarlett, who is 3. And so I want to tell you guys a little story that kind of demonstrates the impact of language. So my children do not sleep, never have, right? Even from an early age, they're not good sleepers. So the other night, my daughter took an hour plus to fall asleep. So sitting in a dark room, trying to keep her in her bed, right, so that she would go to sleep. I'm exhausted. I have work that I want to get caught up on. So eventually she goes to sleep. I walk into my bedroom and really frustrated. I hear myself say out loud to my wife, well, now I can't work on this presentation that I was really needing to get done because Scarlett wouldn't go to sleep, right? So I said, now I have to go to sleep because Scarlett didn't go. Or now I have to go to sleep. I can't work on what I want to because my daughter didn't go to sleep. And so I use that story as an example of how our language impacts our stress, right? So when I said, now I have to do this because this thing didn't happen or did happen, right? I feel as if the world is impacting me, that I have no control, right? And that simply isn't the case, right? So it's pretty common in our language that we use words like could, should, would, have to, right? I could have done that presentation better. I should have prepared more for my presentation. I should have used a calmer voice when I was talking to my children, right? Or I would have worked on this presentation, but my daughter didn't go to sleep. So now I have to get some rest, right? These words, while they're commonplace, imply judgment on ourselves, right? That we're not what we should be, right? Or what we could be, or what we would be. It also implies a lack of choice, right? Which, if anyone has ever taken your choice away, right? Or has appeared like they've taken your choice away, that feels really heavy, right? And our bodies react to that, right? So super, super important to be aware of the impact that our language has on our mental health, right? And specifically around choices. So there's a quote that Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, psychologist, was a Holocaust survivor, went through a number of concentration camps. And so his quote, this is a picture of Mr. Frankl, but his quote says, there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers, which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined if you would become the plaything of circumstance. So the big takeaway for me is that there are always choices to make, right? And that we have to recognize our power to choose. So if I go back to my example of my daughter, right? I didn't have to go to sleep, right? I chose to go to sleep because I was prioritizing my rest and well-being over working on a project, right? But again, if I'm using language like, I have to do this now because this thing didn't happen, again, I'm kind of stealing my own power, right? I'm feeling powerless. But if we intentionally use words like I'm choosing to, right? I'm actively making a decision, right? We feel more empowered, right? And we feel that we can own our choices. We don't have to feel that negative energy, feeling like things are being taken away from us. So I corrected myself in front of my wife. I said, hold on a second. I'm choosing to go to sleep because I'm tired and I need to get rest. I can work on this tomorrow. And suddenly I felt so much lighter because, again, I had a choice to make, right? I recognized my power in that moment. So now there are times that even when we're intentional with our language, right, we still feel some kind of dissonance. Right? So I'm choosing to go to sleep, and I'm still anxious about that. I recognize that I'm choosing that, but I still don't like that, right? And so that gives us a chance to really reflect on what is our truth, right? And so what we have here is a table of levels of truth from the book, The Truth Option. And so you can see here the varying levels, right? Where you're silent, you're not saying anything, right? Maybe you're verbalizing, right? You are a bastard, which is a little bit of an extreme example. But then, okay, I've said this. Now I'm thinking about how I'm feeling, right? Why am I feeling that way? And what does that mean, right? And then about myself, I fear, right? So the example that I like to give from that story is that I was still anxious about going to sleep because I knew I had work to get done. And ultimately, right, as I reflected and kind of worked through those levels of truth, was that I procrastinated probably a little bit more than I should have, right? And so again, through reflection, present moment awareness, I recognized that was my truth. Yes, I was choosing to go to sleep and get rest, but also I was anxious about it because I wasn't probably doing what I should have been doing, right? And prioritizing work. So it's important that, again, we're using words that indicate that we're actively choosing, actively making decisions, but that we're reflecting on that dissonance that sometimes is still there. So another lady that is super, super fantastic. This is Rachel Remen, Dr. Rachel Remen. She wrote a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. And in this book, she talks about approval, right, which I've kind of hit on a little bit, right? When we say things like, I could have done this, I should have done this, I would have done that, we stand in judgment of ourselves, right? And she preaches on acceptance, right? That, okay, well, I didn't get this work done and I'm choosing to go to sleep. And I don't need to judge myself. I need to recognize it. And if I feel some kind of dissonance, I just need to adjust my behavior, but I don't need to judge myself, right? Or seek approval, even of myself, right? So she has a quote that I love, I want to share, that it says, to seek approval is to have no resting place, no sanctuary. Approval can't be trusted. It can be withdrawn at any time, no matter what our track record has been. It's as nourishing of real growth as cotton candy, yet we spend most of our lives pursuing it. Right? We're constantly pursuing approval of family members, of friends, of bosses, of individuals we engage with on a daily basis, right? But what she preaches that we should be just accepting ourselves, right? And if we certainly don't like an outcome, we have the chance to change that. So, fantastic book, highly recommend it. Changed my life. Take a look at it if you get a chance to. It said I have the title at the end of this presentation. So, all right, let's keep it rolling. So, a little exercise to highlight the impact of our language on how we feel. So here's what I would like you to do. If you're comfortable with this, close your eyes, or not, that's okay too. And I want you to think about an experience that you've had recently that maybe negatively influenced you. It wasn't a positive experience. Okay? think about a word that comes to mind to describe how you are feeling with that scenario. I feel stuck, right? Or I feel sad, or I feel defeated, okay? So you're thinking of that negative word, right? And what I want you to do when I prompt you is for 15 seconds, repeat the phrase, I am, insert feeling. I am stuck. I am stuck. I am stuck, right? I want you to repeat that to yourself for 15 seconds. Notice how your body reacts to it and how you're feeling afterwards, okay? So I'm going to count for 15 seconds. I'm going to put the timer on. So I want you to count. So repeat that phrase.
The phrase is, I am what?
So whatever, so think about a negative experience you've had, right? And think of a word to describe that. Right? I am stuck. I am depressed for 15 seconds. How are you feeling? Unmute, jump in the chat. How are you feeling?
Well, I noticed that after I started saying these negative things that I am, I started saying other negative things that I am. Like it was a list. Like I'd say the one thing that like 3 times, and then I found another thing to say about myself. So I kind of piled on. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Right? We tend to spiral a little bit. So yeah, I see hard to breathe, tense, defeated, stressed, right? And so the point here, right, is that you are not your feelings. You are not actually stuck. You are not defeated, right? Okay. But when we say that, right, we embody that. I am stuck, right? I am stuck personified. And our bodies react to that. And our minds react to it because then we start, right? We start building on it, right? We start adding more negative adjectives, right? So there's a technique in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is something I engage with personally. It's been fantastic. There's something called distancing language that can help with this, right? So if you are feeling sad or stuck, whatever your negative emotion is, right? Switch up your language. So instead of saying I am stuck, you could say I'm having the thought that I'm stuck, right? Or I notice that I'm having the feeling of being stuck, right? So again, instead of saying I am this negative emotion, right? I'm having the thought that, I'm having the feeling that, I notice that I have the sensation of, right, being stuck, being sad, right? And it does exactly what it says, right? It creates distance from that feeling, right? You are not your feelings, right? You are simply observing, right? That thought, that feeling. And it's important to remember that we don't have a ton of control of the thoughts that are coming in and out, right? Certainly we can be intentional, we can reflect, we can brainstorm, right? But there are those kind of thoughts that come and go that we don't have a whole lot of control over, right? And we shouldn't be judging ourselves for those, right? Recognize that you've had that thought, accept it, right? Do something with it. Use distancing language. Breathing is incredibly valuable. I know it seems very basic, and I'm sure you guys have been told this, right? But breathing techniques, like the ones that I've listed here, I'll talk through those, can help pull you out of your head a little bit, right? Can help bring you back to the present, right? To where your mind isn't spiraling. So there's something called 3-3-3. And this is, I've heard this called combat breathing. So you breathe in for 3, hold for 3, out for 3. It's one technique. Another one's 4-7-8, very similar. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Okay. So I really prefer, I have a preference for 4-7-8 because if you're trying to calm down, right, the shorter breaths you take in and the longer breaths you take out have a positive reaction on lowering your heart rate, right? So if you guys are aware of this, it's incredibly helpful. Okay. So, we're gonna do a little practice again. So here's what I want you to do. Whatever phrase you were using before, right? I am stuck, I am sad, right? I am depressed. I want you to, we're gonna go through that exercise again. So we're gonna say that for 15 seconds. After that, what I want you to do, right, for another 15 seconds, right, or longer, is to use a breathing technique that I've listed here, or one of your own, or use distancing language. Right? So again, distancing language sounds something like, I notice that I'm having the feeling of being stuck. I notice that I'm having the thought that I'm stuck. Okay? So figure out what your distancing language is going to be if you're going to use that. Okay? So then we're going to try this exercise again. So for 15 seconds, repeat your negative story, right? I am negative emotion. Do that for 15 seconds. Now I want you to use one of the breathing techniques or distancing language for another 30 seconds. Notice how your body responds. As you were wrapping that up, what did you notice about how your body reacted after breathing or after using distancing language or both? What did you notice?
I used distancing language, and then I kind of noticed that one, my mind started saying, "You feel that, but it may not be true." And so I was like, "It's not," and I just kind of it releases a lot of the stress. Or why do you feel that way? I start hearing those things come in.
Nice, Dwight, yeah. Instead of being trapped in a box, walking along a path. Yeah. Very good. Some imagery there.
Started to feel like the super tension in the back of my head when I started saying the word. And then as I did the 4-7-8 breathing exercise, it was like a chill went down my spine and I could kind of felt more relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the tension that we feel, at least I'll speak personally, I won't speak for everybody, right? For myself, when I have the feeling of being stressed, is typically because I'm not grounded in the present. I'm in my mind, right? Fabricating things that have not happened yet. And we're going to talk about this later on, right? Again, what the breathing techniques and the distancing language do is kind of, again, pull you back to reality, but it makes it more objective, right? Kind of what James was saying, like it forces you to go, okay, I'm having the feeling of this, but is there validity there, right? And you can have almost a conversation with yourself, an objective conversation, which is actually what it's a nice segue. And we're going to go into another technique that you guys probably already use, but you may not realize. Any other reflections from that practice?
Hearing everybody's stuff, so actually this morning I was using breathing techniques because I had some pain going on. So learning how to breathe through those and hearing the feedback from people now and what they're experiencing with the breathing techniques, breathing can help create a feeling of expansion. And so it makes the space bigger instead of for me, when, those negative things come up, everything starts feeling really small.
Yep. Yeah, right, because it fills up that space. Your mind is great at fabrication, right? The dark stuff tends to fill up a little faster. It's a little heavier. Yeah, it's a great observation. All right, 4:53. So we're gonna keep rolling here. Okay, so there is another technique that actually comes from something called Gestalt psychotherapy. And so Gestalt psychology is, if you've studied psychology, is not the same thing as Gestalt psychotherapy. It's a little different. It's pretty different. It's less about perception. So this is a technique called the empty chair. And it is essentially having an objective conversation with yourself, or if maybe you were worried about an interaction with another individual, you would have the conversation with yourself as if you were playing both yourself and the person that you were intending to have a conversation with, right? And what this technique does is helps you uncover spiraling, right? Where you're maybe creating false realities that haven't happened. If you're holding assumptions about someone or yourself, right? And again, helps you be a little more objective. And if any of you engage in self-talk, this is it's a very basic version, right, of the empty chair technique. So I've got a kind of a script on the screen. I'm going to read through the script. I recognize that as I'm talking, you guys will be reading too, which is not great instructional practice, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I was thinking about, right, my daughter not going to sleep. And like I would get up, sit outside a room. She'd walk up to the door, right? She'd open the door, lay down, go back in your bed, right? And so I recognized that I was upset. I just wanted to go and be in my room with my wife and watch TV and unwind. I didn't want to sit in her room all night, right? And so as I'm sitting in her room, I'm having this conversation with myself, right? So my daughter gets up every time I leave the room. So I have to stay in here, right? And then my objective self says, well, do you really have to stay in here? Is she forcing you to stay in the room, right? Again, this is highlighting choice, right? Well, no, she's not forcing me. She's 3 years old, right? But if I go to my room, she's just going to get up again. Okay, so my objective side would say something like, so you want her to fall asleep as easily as possible without her getting up a million times. Yes, that would be great, right? And staying in the room satisfies that, right? So what are you really upset about? Right? So if staying in the room gets her to fall asleep quickly, what's the problem, right? Again, my preference is I want to be in my damn room, right? I want to be in my room. I want to unwind with my wife. So what needs to happen in order to be in your room and unwinding with your wife? It needs to lay down. Well, we've already found that solution. It's staying in the room, right? So again, this highlights the importance or the impact of having preferences, right? That we're not checking, right? So again, my preference was to be in my room, right? But that doesn't happen unless there are certain pieces that fall into place, right? And some things we just can't control, right? And other choices that we get to make, right? So preferences, completely fine to have preferences. We all have preferences, right? If I did a poll right now on who likes blueberry muffins versus lemon poppy seed, you all would have a preference, right? But if I gave you blueberry muffins, you wanted lemon poppy seed, you wouldn't lose your mind and throw the muffin out the window, right? Like we're able to check that preference, but there's some preferences that we really just cling to for dear life, right? So it's important, right, when we have a no response to something in life, right? Like maybe say going to have a difficult conversation with somebody. Like, I really don't want to do this, right? I'm not going to do that, right? To explore what is that really about, right? What outcome am I hoping for? Why am I clinging to this so tightly, right? And again, that's a great time to have kind of that empty chair conversation with yourself, right? Check yourself on the language you're using, the assumptions you're making. But the reason unchecked preferences are tricky because they're easily disrupted, right? So if I have a preference to get my kids to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, there are a lot of things that need to happen for that to occur, right? But if I cling so tightly to that I just become unwound, it'll be a really unhappy morning, right? So yes, it's okay to have preferences, but also recognize that, right, that they're just preferences. They're not things that have to happen this way, right? We can be flexible, right? We can still make choices, right? Present moment awareness, and again, this is something we've hit on a little bit, and the importance of not being distracted constantly throughout your day, right? Being on your phone, your computer, right? And also focusing on your breathing, right? Do those breathing exercises. And when you're just breathing, remind yourself that you're breathing in, remind yourself that you're breathing out, right? Because it keeps your mind from wandering. I don't know about you guys, but when my mind wanders, it doesn't necessarily wander to the nicest places, right? And we get in this habit, at least again, myself, speaking for myself, of building false realities. If I don't get the kids to school at 7 o'clock, I'm going to be late. I know I've got a meeting with Dwight. He's going to be waiting for me. He's going to be upset. And then I'm going to have a bad day. He's going to have a bad day. The students are going to get impacted. Whoa, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, right? We're not even there yet, right? So again, those breathing techniques, right? Managing our preferences keeps us out of our brains and spiraling, our minds and spiraling. And our bodies reacting to false realities that haven't even happened, that may never happen, right? So again, those techniques help bring us back to the present moment, keep us grounded. Check the chat. Catwalk crust keyboard, love it. All right. So I blew through that super quickly. Reflections, questions, what do you guys have?
I've really liked this a lot. A breathing technique that someone recently shared with me that I wanted to share, because like we were talking about talking to students and then being able to use your computer screen, and it was called 4-corner breathing. So you start at the bottom corner of your screen and you go up and you breathe in until you get to the top corner. You hold your breath as you go over the screen. You breathe out as you go down to the bottom of the corner, and then hold as you get to the other corner. So it just kind of really gives you another layer of working with that breath, but also kind of further stuff to get you back in the present moment.
Yeah, that's fantastic and super applicable for virtual learning. Right?
Yep.
That's incredible. And the thing I love about that is, again, it gives you a focal point, right? Instead of being in your mind, right, you're focusing on, okay, across the screen, and it keeps you present in the moment. Love it. Awesome. What else? What else came up for you guys? I realized I thundered through that, so.
I love the emphasis on personal choice, like in a stressful situation. And I think we've all seen, like with students who are in distress, how relevant it is, you know, to build in those habits for yourself. And then when you're, you know, with a student who's in distress, being able to have some of those habits to kind of help navigate those situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is, you know, I'm presenting this to educators, but this is also something that, as you all practice with it and become more versed in it, right? Not that anyone's going to be perfect at this, because it's just, we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to judge ourselves. Great tool for students, right? I've had a lot of students that's, you know, that tend to use language that kind of takes their power away from them, right? And so highlighting, you know, when a student says, why didn't I couldn't do that. What prevented you from doing that, right? That's a great time to use coaching questions, right? Open-ended questions. Just use what questions, right? What prevented?
I like that. I like that focus on language also, because just earlier this afternoon, I wrote a message to my mom that said, I can't go see Uncle Albert in the nursing home today. And I thought, I was like feeling guilty, feeling stressed. And then, I realized that I'm choosing not to because I'm exhausted after a long day, and that's okay. So thanks.
Yeah, man, that is, I couldn't have set that up better than that's perfect, right? And we get so used to using language like that. I didn't have time. But did you? Like, could you have made time, or did you just choose to prioritize something else, which is 100% okay, right? And I love that, like when we experience like that feeling of guilt or anxiety, like that's a really good chance to drill down to those levels of truth and go, what am I really feeling this way about, right? Is it that, right? Do I feel guilty because maybe I should have gone to sleep, maybe I shouldn't have, right? I don't know, but that's a great time for reflection. That's awesome. Anything else or any like questions that you guys have, like how would you use this, or can you go back and explain something? Because I rifled through that stuff.
Just the names of the books, I guess.
Oh yeah, yep. So here's some resources. The Happiness Trap is written by Dr. Russ Harris, who's heavily engaged with acceptance and commitment therapy. Great book. Constantly refer that out to people. Kitchen Table Wisdom changed my life. And it sounds kind of heavy, but it really did. So when I was in, I've struggled with anxiety and depression most of my life. I didn't know that until I was term 5 of last year when the world kind of went up in flames. But that book has helped me so much when I was younger, when I was in college and trying to figure out my life, right? But also it's one of those books that I constantly go back to for reminders about, right? Not seeking approval and accepting myself, right? Accepting others. Man's Search for Meaning, another book. I usually carry it with me all the time. Because when I'm feeling heavy, feeling like the world is acting on me, I have a couple quotes in there that I always flip to that remind me that I always have choices to make, right? Some of them are not easy depending on what I'm hoping to achieve, right? But that we always have choices to make. The Truth Option is, I guess you would say it's academic, right? And so it's an older book. You would probably have a difficult time finding it. I actually found a copy at Goodwill once, and there was a syllabus still in the book that was from my teacher that taught me in 2010. But the syllabus was from like 84. It was awesome. It's fantastic. So I bought it anyway, even though I have the book already. So good book, goes through just a ton of stuff. Secular Buddhism podcast is fantastic, right? Talk about right an even deeper dive on present moment awareness, suffering, choices. Noah Rasheta is the gentleman who runs that podcast. I'm not sure if there's a name for that, but fantastic podcast, right? It's not necessarily religion, but again, secular. So just kind of focusing on the philosophy of Buddhism, which lines up nicely with some of these other topics. So these are fantastic. If you find yourself with a little extra time on your hands, more interest. So. Whew. Questions, thoughts, comments, testimonies on your heart?
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I see all of these practices as a way to reshape your feelings, right? You get out of the subjective and you try to get more into the objective. But I'm left with a question of, what ultimately are our feelings, right? So is there some kind of objective certified like truth to our feelings that we can find? And or are we just reorganizing it to a point where it just benefits us, right? I think there are moments that are objectively horrible, right? As Viktor Frankl would probably agree, but also, there's an opportunity to reshape it. And just that continual conflict between subjective and objective is interesting. Thing.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I've struggled with that too. And I have a minor in philosophy, and we hit on that a little bit in college, but nothing super deep that I can recall. But I think people live from their perception, right? So that kind of thought does pose a pretty tough question of, is there some universal truth, right? If there is, how do we access that, right? Given that we have a subjective experience of the world around us. So I think it's a fantastic question, one that I certainly think about. Yeah, I think you said something about opportunities. I think that's an interesting point, that we always have an opportunity to take something and reshape it, right? To suit us, right? Whether that's good, whether that's bad. But I think it's finding what your truth is in that moment. Yeah, it's
I think
fantastic.
sometimes the mean things we say to ourselves are really just a reflection of what I always say the word society a lot, but that's what it is. Like societal expectations. They're not necessarily our expectations, like what we want. It's what people tell us we should want. So I think distancing ourselves from our feeling for a little while allows us to determine, is this what I want, or is this is this an expectation put on me by forces that I don't even understand, that I'm just surrounded by. So, and then if you're like, okay, actually, no, this is what I want. But you just have to think about that. To put, give yourself some time to think about it.
Yeah, I think this thought is connected to a moment I had earlier this week with a student, and talking about their feelings and how they feel. And they were saying, I hate when people tell me that I shouldn't feel this way, because you can't tell me how I feel. This is the way I feel. And there's that kind of barrier to go through as well. Yeah.
And from a personal experience, that's why I have really enjoyed acceptance and commitment therapy, because there is no judgment, right? It's that you feel the way you feel, and that's okay. It's a matter of, do you want to continue feeling like that? You want to change something about it? And if you don't, like, that's your choice. You get to make that, right? But I've really enjoyed some of those techniques. You get to choose, right? If that feeling is, if it's reasonable, if it's appropriate, if it's, no one else gets to tell you if that's appropriate, right? That's good stuff. What you got, James?
I was just going to say, going with that, I had a situation this past week where a student accused me of disrespecting them. And what it was is I was holding her accountable to be where she was supposed to be, and so her feelings were valid, right? She felt like I was disrespecting her. So I just mentioned, and I said, hey, can we talk? And when she was ready to talk, then we got together and I said, so this is not behavior that I've seen out of you normally. So what's going on? What caused us to get to this place? And she was just able to tell me what was going on with life. So she felt disrespected, but it was mainly, she had all these things going on in life, and there was a lot of stress. And at that moment, there was an assignment due and she wasn't ready. So she felt like, boom, I don't have to, and you got to treat me, you know what I mean? And so she was able to talk through it. And that was hard. But at first I was angry, because I was like, I work really hard to make sure I treat everyone the same and I don't disrespect anyone. And then I was like, well, no, there's something going on. This is not who she is. And I had to kind of talk myself down. And so my anger was valid, but I had to ask myself, why did I have that anger? And then was I looking at it from her perspective? And that kind of helped with me. Sorry to kind of go all over.
That's good. No, I'm tracking. Yeah. And that's, and I've been in situations like that. And typically if I'm the student, right, and someone, and I have maybe, but again, it's levels of truth, right? If I know that I'm supposed to be somewhere on time, or that I procrastinated, and somebody calls me on it, right? They've brought that truth to the forefront, right? I have some kind of a tense reaction, right? But I think seeking understanding is incredibly helpful, right? We don't have to take, we get to choose if we take those kind of interactions personal, but right, just seeking to understand goes a long way. Not judging, but just, right, trying to get on the same level as someone else and understand them. It's huge.
To go back to the conversation before James had commented, one thing that I feel like I'm kind of experiencing with Steph is I've noticed that for myself, I do really good at making my lemonade out of that lemons, but I haven't allowed myself that space to actually feel it. So I'm still holding all of the stuff. So right now I feel like I'm learning that balance of, and actually hearing people now, the way it's kind of shaping up in my mind is like, I need to use the breathing techniques to get myself to distance myself out of that space, but also learn how to actually allow myself to have that emotion instead of just using the breathing technique to shut it off and never come back to it again. Because I think that's what I'm experiencing a lot is you always hear this idea of like, well, take some deep breaths, and it's sometimes it feels very placating of like, no, my emotion is valid. What are we going to do with this? And so that's what I'm trying to learn as well with myself, so I can give it out to others of, okay, so I have this emotion, and yes, I've worked through these things and I see all this stuff, but still, what do I do with this now? How do I move forward? Like, yes, I've done the breathing techniques, but that doesn't change. I still have this emotion here.
It's a great reflection. Yeah, it's good stuff. What else, if anything? Anything else, guys?
Yeah, Greg, I just appreciate your story at the beginning, the stage of life that you're in with young kids being married. It's like there is no empty chair ever. There is no space to do that exercise. And I was like, maybe that's what journaling is. That's why I like to write, because it's like
Essentially,
me in this empty chair on my paper. But I was just curious, like, because at some level there is a healthy processing of anger that comes with parenting, and it's, I don't know, there's a reason Tony Dungy had to get on the radio and tell people not to throw their babies against the wall. Like, it's a real thing. And unless you express it in a healthy way and have someone maybe empathize with you, sometimes you get stuck. So I wondered if, for you, has it been a lot of, is there a relational piece too, in terms of like empathy from somebody else that helps you get through those moments? Or do you feel like in that moment, that objective kind of clearing of the mind and being in the moment was enough for you to release that emotion in a healthy way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it personally for me, it takes a great deal of practice. Like, I mean, I studied psychology for 6 years, right? And so these techniques I've practiced for years and years, right? And typically what happens, you know, with my kids, because they're great examples, you know, if I choose to feel upset about something they're doing, right, and I can feel it coming, I'm like, okay, right. Then I kind of breathe and like, what am I upset about, right? And I do kind of have to. It happens pretty quickly. But a great example is, probably shouldn't call my wife out, but I do sometimes. She calls me out. It's helpful sometimes. But like if my wife's on her phone, like she's looking at something, she's trying to do something for work, and the kids are being noisy, right? She'll have maybe a pretty quick reaction. I'm like, you only have that reaction because you're trying to do something else. You're not mad that they're noisy. You're mad that you're trying to do something else and you're being distracted. So just go somewhere else, right? Be distracted, right? So I think it is for me, breathing, being present in the moment, and trying to quickly ask myself, what am I really upset about? Am I upset about my kids' behavior? Because if I am, then I get to tell them, hey, I don't like when you hit your sister, right? What else could you do to tell your sister that you're angry, right? So it's just a lot of practice, right? And trying to do it in real time. It's not always easy. What else? If anything, love the stories. Well, hey, it's 5:17. We spent 30 minutes just talking. It's just sometimes even better than the presentation. It's good stuff. Well, I highly encourage you guys, take a look at those resources. Really good stuff. Something else that would be, if you guys are working through stuff like this, and this is a shameless pitch, and if you're maybe not sure that therapy is right for you, find a coach, like someone who engages in professional coaching. There's marvelous stuff, right? That can help you unpack, right? some of that extra extra baggage that you might be carrying around. So I happen to be a coach, so shoot me an email. But thank you guys for the time. Thank you for your openness, your vulnerability, for sharing your stories.